Welcome back to Pokemon episode summaries. Today, I'll be doing episode 242, Some Like It Hot. The episode begins with Ash and the gang heading to Blackthorn City, with Ash extremely excited to win his final badge. He was so excited that when he was informed by Brock that the gang had just entered a hot volcanic zone, he didn't care whatsoever and simply continued to gush about the badge. Misty, however, was not nearly as cheerful as Ash, as she was complaining about the immense heat, which Brock explained was obviously due to the volcanoes in the rocky area, with Misty eventually stating that the immense heat was why she hated fire types so much, and loved water types. Brock then spotted a hot spring in the distance and directed Ash and Misty to it, with Misty excited at first to go there, hoping it would cool her down due to it being water. However, she was disappointed when she remembered that it was a hot spring. In this same hot spring that Brock had spotted, Team Rocket, especially Wobbuffet and Jessie, as Wobbuffet had a cloth on its head, trying to relax, were really enjoying this hot spring, with Jessie stating that it was nice to take a break from their usual job for once. Just then, Meowth's relaxation was interrupted as he spotted Ash and the gang approaching the hot spring, and suggested that they all get out and try and ambush Ash and the gang, while they still could. However, Jessie and James simply tried to ignore Meowth, stating that they would rather relax and take a break than go after Ash and the gang, stating that Ash and the gang were the reason for their stress that made them need to relax in the first place, so they didn't want to end up making their stress worse. Team Rocket are then met with another surprise, aside from Ash and the gang, being a geyser which had popped up nearby in the hot spring. Several others then pop up, and they're amazed at the beautiful sight of the beautiful water being rushed upwards, but they soon have their amazement turned into hatred for geysers as the water rumbled, indicating that there was another huge geyser about to come up, and this one appeared right underneath Team Rocket, lifting them up out of the hot spring and sending them blasting off. Even though Ash and the gang were walking by this hot spring, they ignored Team Rocket blasting off, as they were too distracted by how fucking hot it was and how tired they were of walking, especially since the ground was hot, so their feet were burning. They were just so hot and bitchy that Ash and Misty got into a little argument, knowing that it was pointless, but continuing anyways, as they simply wanted to do something to somewhat distract themselves from all the heat. They managed to find another distraction from all of the heat, though, being a Pokemon that they had never seen before, so Ash used his Pokedex on it, revealing it as a Macargo, the Fire-type Lava Pokemon, a Pokemon that may let out a flame from the shell on its back. Ash and the gang wondered where the Pokemon had come from, as it seemed as if it had come out of nowhere, so they looked for where it could have potentially come from, looking on the nearby cliffs above them, where Brock was the first one to spot a whole bunch of other Macargo. Brock was impressed by seeing this many of the same species gathered in one area. However, Misty seemed to be scared or irritated by the Macargo, or just irritated in general, wanting to find a cooler place, so she urged Ash and Brock along, telling them to not worry about the Macargo and simply try and find a cooler place. Thankfully, for Misty, Ash and the gang did manage to find a cooler place, being a narrow mountain pass that was far enough away from a volcano. The coolness couldn't be enjoyed for long, though, as Ash and the gang soon encountered a giant, sleeping Macargo blocking the mountain pass's path, much to their frustration, as Ash then angrily yelled at the Macargo, demanding it to wake up and move the fuck out of the way. Ash did manage to wake Macargo up, but it was now extremely angry at its sleep being disturbed, and prepared to fire a flamethrower at Ash and the gang as its cheeks filled up with fire. When the flamethrower was unleashed, though, Ash and the gang quickly ducked, avoiding the flamethrower, and then ran away from the Macargo in fear, stating that it had a really bad temper, and they didn't want to mess with it. Macargo only got more angry when Ash and the gang pointed out its temper, so it decided to attack again with yet another flamethrower, but thankfully, Ash and the gang were able to dodge it again as they continued to run away, which led Macargo to give up and go back to sleep, blocking the path once more. Unfortunately, Ash and the gang remembered that they had to get to whatever was on the other side of the mountain pass if they wanted to get to Blackthorn City, so with that, Ash and the gang reluctantly decided to go back to where the Macargo was now sleeping, with Ash getting the idea to battle it, to scare it out of the way. Ash was about to send out one of his Pokemon to battle, but Misty stopped him, reminding him that she was a Water-type master, and therefore her Water types would do way better against a Fire-type like Macargo than most of Ash's Pokemon. With that, Misty goes out to send in her trusty Staryu, but Psyduck forcibly pops out of its Pokeball instead. Misty was obviously pissed off at Psyduck's interruption, and she only got even more pissed off as Psyduck just stared at Macargo, examining it, not making any moves. It then decided to touch it to make a further examination, though, and as a result, Macargo woke up. Macargo obviously looked angry at Psyduck, and this scared Psyduck to no end, as it immediately ran to hide behind Misty's legs for cover. Misty got even more annoyed by this, so annoyed that she instantly recalled Psyduck into his Pokeball and sent out Poliwhirl instead, having it shoot a water gun at Macargo, hoping that it would weaken it. However, the water gun didn't end up doing much damage, as Macargo withdrew into its shell, leaving Misty surprised at its good defense. Macargo then re-emerged from its shell, with the water gun now being gone, and stomped around a little bit, intentionally causing a rock slide to occur, with rocks falling down the cliff. Misty told the Poliwhirl to dodge the rock slide, which it did by hopping on top of the rocks, and then Macargo went in for a body slam, but Poliwhirl was able to dodge that as well. But, unfortunately, Poliwhirl was not able to avoid a flamethrower from Macargo, and lost the battle because of it, forcing Misty to recall it and congratulate it on doing a great job, regardless of its failure. Although she was a bit bent out of shape at the fact that a Fire-type attack had been what had finished Poliwhirl off. Just then, laughing could be heard from somewhere in the distance, so Ash and the gang looked around, tilting their heads, and they eventually noticed a boy standing up on the cliff, who proceeded to make fun of Misty's battle techniques, saying that she put up a pathetic battle, and also saying that he could do way better. Misty obviously got angry at this insult, leading her to begin arguing with the boy, as the boy yelled at her that she was way too incompetent to even think about defeating Macargo. She obviously couldn't. Misty then retaliates back by ordering the boy to jump down from the cliff he was on and come to her so they could talk face to face. And the boy instantly agrees, stating that there was no way that he wouldn't make it down the cliff, even if he jumped off, because he was so experienced around volcanoes. Being the burning master, stating volcanoes were his life, and it was his life goal to explore them, including the cliff areas around them. So, with that, he tried to jump off of the cliff down to Misty, but Brock warned him that it would be too dangerous for a little kid like him. This made him a little more reluctant, but he still jumped down. Unfortunately for him, Brock's warning was proved right, as he landed flat on his face. Despite this, he was somehow only a little bit injured from the fall, which impressed Ash. Misty was far from impressed though, as she yelled at the boy for all of his previous insults towards her, only leading the boy to insult her more, and also insults him for his humiliating fall. The boy didn't care about Misty's insults whatsoever, as he simply rebutted that Misty was extremely fucking weak, and with the fact that she couldn't even defeat Macargo with water Pokemon. And also makes fun of the fact that Misty tried to ditch the battle and run away. And also responds that he purposely fell off of the cliff in an attempt to distract Misty so that she wouldn't try and capture the Macargo again, so he could capture it for himself. So that's what he goes to do, but Misty goes up to the Macargo as well, wanting to get revenge on it, and the Macargo then slithers away into a nearby cave, out of sight from Misty and the boy. The boy blames Misty entirely for this, stating that the Macargo was likely frightened when it saw Misty, knowing how bad of a battler she was, and ran away because of this. The boy then tried to look for Macargo a little bit inside the cave, but he retreated back outside, not wanting to get lost. Misty was of course still angry at the boy for all the yelling that he had done towards her, and said that if she was going to continue to hate someone so much, then she should at least know the person's name. So the boy introduced himself as Egan, the Prince of Fire, who trains exclusively Fire-type Pokemon. Since they were apparently the best type, and Egan was a master of them. The comment about Fire Pokemon being the best angered Misty, as she obviously didn't like them very much, and she was so angry that Ash and Brock had to try and restrain her, leading Egan to come to the conclusion that Misty must have been a fireman trying to put out his love for fire. But Misty retorted that she was merely the Water Princess, the master of water Pokemon. Brock and Ash were annoyed by this, because they knew that Misty was far from the master of water Pokemon yet, although they didn't say anything to Misty, not wanting to further piss her off. Misty and Egan then get into an argument where Misty tries to defend water Pokemon, and Egan tries to defend fire Pokemon, and the argument ends up leading into Misty claiming that she knew that she could beat Egan in a battle, since water Pokemon were better, and Egan wanted to prove her wrong. So with that, a battle was about to commence between the two. Ash and Brock were now enjoying the pure arguing, so they would rather see that than see a battle. So Ash tried to convince Misty and Egan that the battle wouldn't work. Egan eventually comes to this conclusion, but for the reason that he figured the battle would be pointless and boring, since Misty was so weak. So with that, he decides to abandon the challenge, and instead just go looking for the Macargo in an attempt to capture it, like he was originally going to do. Misty was even more angered by this, so she yelled at Egan that there was no way he could capture the Macargo with his goddamn fire Pokemon if her Poliwhirl had lost to it. Ash, not enjoying the argument, since it was only one-sided now, tells Misty to cut it out, and explains that they should just leave Egan and the Macargo be, and abandon this goddamn area, since Macargo had now stopped blocking the path, so Ash and the gang could continue on. Meanwhile, it turns out that Team Rocket had blasted off straight into their Meowth balloon, and despite being blown off by a geyser, they were still happy with the time of relaxation they had in the hot spring today. They then fly over another hot spring though, and a geyser fires up, sending them blasting off again, stopping them from coming up with a plan to steal Ash's Pikachu. Back with Ash and the gang, even though they were now freely continuing their journey, not being blocked by the Macargo, Misty was still immensely angry, thinking about everything Egan had said, and grunting, when suddenly Ash and the gang spot Egan coming out of a nearby cave that his chase for Macargo must have led him into. Egan eagerly asks if Ash and the gang had saw Macargo, indicating that he had lost sight of it, and Misty decides to play a trick on Egan, sarcastically saying that she had. However, Egan picked up on her sarcasm, so this just escalated into another argument. The argument almost immediately comes to an end though, as the Macargo then comes out from the same cave, so Egan challenges it to a battle and sends out his Flareon, having it start with Flamethrower, followed by a quick attack. However, both of these attacks did absolutely nothing, as Macargo just withdrawed into its shell. Misty laughed at this, hoping that Egan and his Flareon would meet the same fate as her and her Poliwhirl, and it seemed as though this might be the case, as Macargo then smashed itself against the cliff, as it did before, causing a rock slide. Thankfully for Flareon, it manages to use a combination of agility and quick attack to avoid most of the falling rocks, but there was a huge boulder that it couldn't end up avoiding, so it got hit by it. Flareon was still okay though, so Egan had it try another Flamethrower, but Macargo simply went back into its shell again, which made Egan angry at Macargo's apparent cowardice. With Egan distracted by this, Macargo takes the opportunity to launch a Flamethrower of his own at Flareon, which severely injures it. Flareon wasn't down for the count yet though, as it tried its best to get up, and the Macargo seemed to be impressed by Flareon's efforts as it stopped its attacking to watch it get back up. Ash and the gang were also amazed at both the Macargo stopping battling and the Flareon getting back up. Seeing Flareon get back up, Macargo continued to battle as well, going for a Body Slam, followed by a Fire Spin, essentially combining the two attacks. Misty didn't want to see Flareon get hurt, so She suggested that Egan have Flareon try and dodge the attacks, but Egan simply told her to stay out of his goddamn battle and ordered Flareon to attack with a flaming tackle. However, this flaming tackle simply bounces off Magcargo, knocking Flareon to the ground. Misty saw how dire the situation could get, so she now suggested that Egan abandon the battle and call back Flareon, warning Egan that it was practically impossible for him to win at this rate, since Flareon looked like it was about to faint. However, Flareon then got back up again, so Egan refuses to listen to Misty, stating that he would never give up, as he tells Flareon to continue battling no matter what, to use another flamethrower. However, Magcargo uses a flamethrower of its own. Therefore, Flareon responded by powering up its own flamethrower. Magcargo just did the same thing, though, and was therefore powerful enough to break through Flareon's flamethrower and hit it. Egan simply laughed, though, as he knew that it would take more than a flamethrower to defeat Flareon, and taunted Misty that he was at least able to give Magcargo some damage. Just then, though, Egan realized that his assumption was wrong, and Flareon had actually fainted from the attack, so Egan recalled it, congratulating it for its hard work, regardless of the loss. However, while he was recalling Flareon, this gave the Magcargo a chance to escape back into the cave. Ash and Brock were pleased by this, as that meant that now not only Misty and Egan had the opportunity to try and catch the Magcargo, but now the two of them could as well, the next time Magcargo appeared. Egan begins to walk away in shame of his loss, telling Ash and the gang that they can now laugh at him all they wanted. Misty happily obliges, and this leads Egan to get angry, claiming that he was just saying that to be tough, and he didn't actually want them to laugh at him. Misty continues to taunt, though, that laughter was the best medicine, which made Egan threaten her, stating that if she didn't stop laughing, then there would be consequences. Misty rebutted, though, that she couldn't help herself from laughing, since she had to laugh at someone for being so against water Pokemon when they could easily use them to defeat the fire types that he wanted so bad. Misty then taunts Egan some more, stating that he could borrow her water Pokemon if he wanted, and this just gets Egan even more angry, causing an argument to erupt once again about if fire Pokemon or water Pokemon were better. Brock didn't want to listen to the arguing this time, so he butted in that their anger should be soothed by some lunch. Egan refuses Brock's offer, claiming that Brock was probably lying to him, wanting to taunt him, believing that there wasn't actually lunch. However, Misty reassured Egan that Brock didn't hate him like she did, and he was honest. Egan obviously didn't take Misty's word, so he refused again, but then his stomach growled, leading Misty to make fun of him even more. Knowing how hungry he was, Egan then gives in and claims that he didn't want to be rude to Brock, so he'll accept his lunch offer. Even though this really had nothing to do with Brock, Egan was just hungry as fuck. Meanwhile, as for Team Rocket, they were spying on Ash and the gang, and Egan, and eventually, Jessie comes up with a plan to try and steal Pikachu, while Ash and the gang and Egan were distracted with trying to catch the Magcargo. Meowth was hungry though, so he suggested that they not only steal Pikachu, but also Ash and the gang's lunch. James was hungry as well, so retorted that they should instead just focus purely on the lunch, and this led to a three-way argument between Jessie, James, and Meowth, and eventually though, they all agreed with Meowth's plan of getting both Pikachu and the food. Suddenly, Team Rocket all began to get really hot, as they noticed a sharp increase in the temperature. This was because Magcargo had arrived and begun using flamethrower right on their backs. They were about to run away to head for Ash and the gang before Magcargo attacked, but now that Magcargo was attacking, they had yet another reason to run away, to try and put out the flames, and thankfully they managed to, as the Magcargo eventually stopped chasing them. Meanwhile, back with Ash and the gang, as they all finished lunch, and Flareon finished the Pokemon food that Brock had gave it, Egan had begun to warm up to Ash and the gang, as well as Misty, as thanks for all the food, which he admitted to Brock was really good, and Misty proceeded to warm up to him as well, as she even offered him some hot chocolate after the meal. That happened to be mixed with tea and hot cocoa as well. Surprisingly, Egan liked it and complimented Misty on the tea. Misty thanks Egan for the compliment and brings his attention to his Flareon, stating that it seemed pretty happy and was enjoying its meal, making Egan glad, admitting that he felt bad for pushing his Flareon as hard as he did, admitting that his Flareon was very special to him and he would do anything to see it happy, explaining that the only reason why he pushed Flareon so hard was because he knew that Flareon had the same desire to battle as him, stating that they both got fired up in battle and had to continue doing so, otherwise the fire would end up burning them up, essentially meaning that they had to battle to stay at their peak happiness. And this seemed to be true, as Misty observed how happy Flareon was, seeing that Flareon and Egan did love each other after all. And Egan did treat his Flareon well. Misty then saw as Egan petted his Flareon and reminded it that he hadn't forgotten about their battle against Magcargo, stating that he knew they were going to get revenge against it, and Misty also saw that Flareon was indeed just as hyped to win this battle. So, Misty didn't want to be left out of this, and admits that she got just as fired up during battle as well, leading Egan to joke that this must have meant Misty had a really bad temper if she got fired up super easily. Misty was beginning to get angry at this, so Egan changed the subject, talking about how he didn't like when people always seemed to diss his Flareon, assuming that they didn't like him or his Flareon because they were always confident, explaining that he would always tell Flareon to charge up its flamethrower before battle, and tell it to absolutely eviscerate its opponent. He then proceeded to do this exact procedure to Flareon right then and there to get it ready for its inevitable battle with Magcargo again. Misty then tried to comfort Egan, stating that the only reason why trainers probably dissed his Flareon was because they were insecure about potentially losing and wanted to make themselves seem stronger than they were, and as a result, they would end up overestimating their own strength and losing the battle, being just purely determined to take out the person who wasn't insecure and instead confident, referencing Egan and Misty's interaction from before, where they were so focused on insulting each other's fire types and water types that Egan wasn't able to focus on capturing the Macargo. Egan interprets Misty's statement as meaning that he could be as overconfident as he wanted, and it would only work in his favor, so he proceeded to hype up his Flareon immensely, and this started to annoy Misty, as she explained that there was such thing as overconfidence as well, even from an already confident trainer, leading Egan to apologize for getting ahead of himself. Surprised that he was able to misinterpret Misty's statement, Misty was relieved to see that Egan wasn't as much of a dick anymore, and was open to what other people thought, so she decided to accept his apology, smiling. With their rivalry now over, being friends, Egan didn't want to tarnish that by bragging about his Flareon again, so he decided to ask Misty about the water Pokemon that she loved so much, asking why she loved them, leading Misty to tell Egan about this famous book called Feelings of Water, which Misty had always loved and got her interested in water Pokemon. Further explaining that the book told her that water Pokemon were just like water. They were very flexible and could change and adapt to nearly any situation. Egan didn't really understand what Misty meant by this, so Misty explained how water was adaptable since it could be in many forms, such as taking the shape of the cup that it was poured into, stating how she found that really cool. She then explained how water taking the shape of a cup related to water Pokemon, explaining that the water Pokemon should be just as quick to adapt as water was, no matter what attack hit you. Essentially, she was explaining that she liked water Pokemon so much because they were able to adjust to any situation quickly. And the quickly part was very important, as that was utilized for dodging. Egan then counters that Misty didn't do a whole lot of dodging against Macargo, so her water Pokemon must not have been able to be that adaptive after all, which angered Misty, countering back that if he didn't want to immediately end their new friendship, then he would have to stop being so fucking rude. So, Egan obliged, and tried to rescind his insult to Misty by stating that he would use Misty's failure as a reminder for himself to dodge a lot of Macargo's attacks when he challenged it again, which he was now very determined to do, along with his Flareon, making Ash and Brock very relieved, especially at the fact that Egan and Misty were now getting along, since even they got sick of Misty and Egan's arguing before. Just then, Ash spotted Macargo come out of the cave and alerted Egan. With that, Egan hyped himself up a bit as he got mentally prepared for his battle with Macargo and sent out his Flareon. However, before Flareon could get off any attacks, Macargo went for the first one, slamming itself into the cliff again, making another rock slide occur. Egan remembered his promise to Misty to take her advice of water Pokemon being adaptable, and had Flareon dodge the rocks as Flareon studied them, being able to avoid when they fell, using Quick Attack to do so, as well as attack Macargo head-on. Flareon tried to follow up with a flamethrower, but Macargo simply would draw it into its shell again. Macargo then got confused though, as Flareon ran up to it and jumped on its shell, and proceeded to use flamethrower on the shell's sensitive parts. This caused Macargo to emerge from its shell and try to shake Flareon off, but Flareon managed to hang on and use another flamethrower to do even more damage to Macargo. However, this just caused Macargo to go back into its shell and knocked Flareon off. Flareon went to go jump on Macargo's shell again, but Egan told it not to, explaining that it had already inflicted enough damage that only a few more hits should be able to knock it out. So he instead had Flareon run to the cliff and charge at the Macargo with a full-speed tackle attack, and this was enough to weaken Macargo even more, forcing it to emerge from its shell dazed, to the point where it was able to be knocked out with one last flamethrower. With that, Egan throws a Pokeball, and Ash and the gang watch with him anxiously as the Pokeball shakes, and eventually it catches Macargo, leading Egan, Flareon, and Ash and the gang to cheer very loudly, pleased with the catch. The happiness didn't last long though, as just then, a huge robot arm deployed from Team Rocket's Meowth balloon and pulled up the Pokeball into the balloon, as Team Rocket revealed themselves in baseball player disguises, doing their motto while in the baseball disguises. Ash and the gang and Egan then yell at Team Rocket to give the ball back, but of course Team Rocket refused and began flying away in their balloon. This just angered Misty even more though, being more angry than any time that Egan had insulted her, and she sends out her Poliwhirl and orders it to use Water Gun, hoping to impress Egan with her Water-type skills, and prove to him how awesome Water types were. This probably worked, as Poliwhirl's Water Gun was aimed directly for the robot arm, which hit a button, which destroyed it, releasing Egan's Pokeball, allowing him to pick it up, now having his Macargo back, leading Egan to happily thank Misty for the assistance. Just then, Team Rocket tried to get the ball back by sending out their Arbok and Victreebel, of course with Victreebel eating James first. Egan decides to not let them take the ball, as he sends Macargo out of the ball so that it could fight Arbok and Victreebel itself. However, Arbok and Victreebel make the first moves, being Poison Sting and Razor Leaf respectively, and although these attacks hit Macargo the first time, the next time, Arbok's Poison Sting is countered by Poliwhirl's Water Gun, as Misty went in to help, and Victreebel's Razor Leaves were countered by Macargo's Flamethrower. Macargo and Poliwhirl then combine their attacks to form a flaming water gun, and as a result, Arbok and Victreebel are pushed into the Meowth balloon, knocking them out, and Pikachu then finishes off the balloon on Team Rocket, sending them blasting off with a Thunderbolt. With Team Rocket gone, Egan and Misty complimented each other's skills in Pokemon, with Egan first apologizing for insulting Watermons, and Misty apologizing for insulting Firemons. Ash and Brock then began to depart for Blackthorn City, although Misty was hesitant to, as she had now become very close with Egan and didn't want to leave him, stating that she didn't want to say the last word. But Egan responded that he didn't want to have to say the last word either, and one of them would have to. However, they then realized that neither of them had to actually have the last word, as they could make their last gesture a handshake, and so they shook hands as they laughed, shocked at how quickly they had went from enemies to friends, as they promised to meet again someday and battle each other. As Misty and Egan stopped shaking hands, Egan blushed, and Misty smiled immensely, suggesting that they had actually become more than friends and had both developed a crush on each other. However, neither of them acted on this, as Misty caught up with Ash and Brock and headed towards Blackthorn City, as Egan went the opposite way, after the two lovers had said goodbye to each other. The episode then ends with Egan looking back at Misty as he walked off, and he proceeded to blow a kiss to her with a very, very immense blush still, and he muttered to himself, "My water princess. Alright, you fucking simp, we already have Brock. We don't need another one here. I'm so glad we'll never see you again."